To introduce Mark Gorenberg. Mark has been a venture capitalist for 26 years and is a founder and managing director of Zetta Venture Partners. Of course, one of our titanium sponsors for this event. Zetta Venture Partners is the first early stage fund focused only on intelligent enterprise. Prior to his career in venture capital, Mark served as a software executive at Sun Microsystems. Mark is currently on the MIT Corporation and a board member for the MIT Investment Committee. Mark graduated from MIT and has master's degrees from the University of Minnesota and also Stanford. Please welcome Mark.
Bridget, thank you for that introduction. And let me take the last speaker's prerogative to thank Shuja Keen and this entire group of MIT Northern California folks for this incredible event, far better than anybody could have ever expected. Please, thank you. Shuja started off this morning by thanking us for our love of AI and thanking us for our love of MIT. So I want to honor that by putting together a presentation that blends the two together, effectively gives you our priorities, but also gives you the priorities of MIT and maybe some of the things that are coming up in Cambridge. And before we do that, we're going to look a little bit at AI and see where it's been, where it is, where it's going. In 2000, the amount of digital data surpassed the amount of analog data. And by the middle of the last decade, mobile hit a tipping point. Consumers moved de facto to the cloud. And by 2005, Google and Amazon were able to start to use a lot of data to do personalization and recommendations. And although we didn't know it at the time, that past decade really became the starting point for modern AI. And that starting point was all about optimizing the life of the individual. That consumer then started to bring their systems into their office places, the consumerization of IT. That happened by 2010 that we crossed enough data that we entered into the zettabyte era, 1 trillion gigabytes of data. That coupled with the adoption of algorithms and high-performance computing has led us to the decade of today. And that has not only continued the life of optimizing the individual, but now also optimizing the life of the enterprise. And that's created a whole new set of market leaders. So, for example, Domo, a company that we're involved with, has transformed business intelligence into real-time business optimization. They've now created the world's largest business cloud, 25 petabytes, almost 2,000 customers, and 1 trillion rows of information every month. And let me recognize Catherine Wong, their Chief Product Officer, who is here. So if you'd like to talk with her during the reception or at the break. And about mid-decade now, we're starting to see the influx of sensors. And so we're starting to see simple IoT systems also be put in place. And by the end of the decade, we'll see 50 billion sensors, and that's going to take us to the next wave. And that's the wave of being able to optimize very complicated, multidisciplinary systems, effectively bringing us to our future, the idea of optimizing for a better world. All of our companies today are implementing something that we call the virtuous loop. This was referred to by Google, this was referred to by Amazon, this was referred to by Salesforce in their talks earlier today. And the virtuous loop takes in anonymous customer data, data exhaust, public data, and data through APIs, and that then is fed through the system, goes through algorithms, comes up with cleaner data, goes through again, keeps wash, rinse, and repeat, and keeps coming up with better and better insights. Effectively, it becomes the brains for these systems. And it's our belief that small companies can implement the virtuous loop. They start with minimal viable products, they get small customers initially, that generates a lot of data, and then from that, they get good enough results, far better than systems without a brain, that they can then attract big companies to join them. And so any startup can get involved. And by having a virtuous loop, that brain basically connects to an app layer And that brain gives you real-time results. It gives you much more granular results. It gives you the ability to do prediction, which allows you to have much more accurate results. And so that becomes the now system that eclipses everything that was before. And we funded intelligence software in a number of application areas through that application layer, in sales and marketing, and product development and testing, in auto insurance claims, in language translation, in workplace optimization, in energy management of buildings, in commerce shipping, in manufacturing production lines. And you can think of anything that will end up feeding into this concept, and basically everything will be that way. And companies will name their virtuous loops. So for example, we're investors in a company called Inside Sales. They have a sales acceleration platform. They have 100 billion records of data. They're adding 5 billion records a month. They call their virtuous loop Neurolytics. Customers don't totally understand what it does, but it gives them 30% lift in sales conversions, and that's what they recognize. We're investors in a company called Marketing Evolution. Their CEO, Rex Briggs, is here today. And their virtuous loop is called the ROI Brain. They, over time, have gotten the profiles and perfected sort of the connection to 320 million consumers. And from that, they are able to granularly and in real time change the marketing mix that companies use to be able to target down to the individual. Again, it's unclear that their customers totally understand what they're doing, but they're getting 30% lift also in marketing conversion over the systems that are already there. A Lucid Design Group, which does this for buildings, 30% increase, 30% savings in energy use, 20% savings in water use. Falconry, who you saw earlier today, can give you predictions on production lines going down 12 hours in advance. This is all because of implementing this virtuous loop inside their products. So where are we headed? I would argue that tomorrow we're headed for the same place that MIT is. And these are the priorities that they see today through their campaign. The idea of AI permeating basic research and new technologies, commercializing that through innovation and entrepreneurship. And then two of the big tentpoles that have been already talked about today and we can refer to, the next decade about creating a healthier planet, designing and creating a healthier planet, about improving human health. These are very complicated organisms that can't be done with simple systems, but will be there by the next decade to conquer them. In terms of basic research, these are some of the ideas that have, and they've been talked about today, so I won't belabor them. But the first one, Computing Like a Human, is a paper that Kanu Gulati at Zetta wrote multi-parts of earlier this year. And that is the idea that it's no longer about just power and speed, but about the idea of tolerating errors in results such that they're still viable. Effectively, the way that we think. What does that do? It lets you cut through neural nets much, much faster. It also lets you use far less power in making a decision. And that will be a concept that we'll see working in systems in the future. Reinforcement learning was talked about at length in a great talk by Danny Lang earlier today. And quantum computing, which has been a dream for the last couple decades, looks like it's within about 5 to 10 years now. Creating supercomputers that are maybe 3 times more powerful than the supercomputers that we have today. And they'll be conquering machine learning initially and really being able to move this forward. And there are conferences. MIT has 14 entrepreneurship centers to take this basic research and commercialize it. And this is just one example. The Deshpande Center has now looked at about 800 proposals within MIT, and 33 of them have turned into startups. Effectively, 130 were funded with research grants, and then 33 have turned into commercial startups, and those startups have raised $650 million. And so their conference is next Friday, their annual conference called IdeaStream, just one, again, of 14 entrepreneurship centers that are at MIT. In terms of design and health of the planet, Some of these have been talked about earlier today, but there's 4 main areas that are really undergoing change due to artificial intelligence, the tentpoles of energy and environment and agriculture and water. In terms of energy, that's a plant that's implemented at Stanford. It now powers all of Stanford. It's a combined heating and cooling system, a first of its kind. Effectively, the exhaust from cooling goes into heating. It's a huge savings in terms of energy. And the curves from all that can go through machine learning algorithms to try to figure out how to move that forward for other climates and be implemented in other places. The other part about energy that's very fascinating today is that we can now instrument the electric grid. And the electric grid, once you get down to very granular, create your virtuous loop out of that, you can start to build load curves in real time that are much closer to what's actually going on. And that, again, gives huge savings to utilities. And we're starting to see that in place as well. In terms of agriculture, there's a number of people that are implementing machine learning today, starting with drones, as was shown earlier, to try to figure out, how to get crop yield up. In fact, the business plan competition winner at MIT's 100K 2 years ago was a group for the very first time out of the Aero-Astro department because of the idea of improving agriculture. But what I find really fascinating about where we're headed tomorrow is not these individual areas, but the idea of trying to bring them all together to be able to create something really amazing in terms of optimizing the things that we need on this planet. 84% of the people in this country by the end of the next decade will live in cities. And cities have not only data and sensors that they're putting in, but they're putting in all these new technologies, district energy, district water, transportation that you saw earlier today with autonomous vehicles, brand new buildings. When you put all that together, you can start to look at individual districts of cities and try to optimize them all together. And that creates a major change. And in fact, the argument I would have is that the starting point, you saw a panel today on autonomous vehicles, 31% of the land in downtowns are used up for parking. 95% of the time, cars are sitting idle. 30% of the time, people are driving around trying to find parking and the congestion that comes out of that. So if you can transform that part of it by putting in autonomous vehicles over the next decade, you free up a ton of land in cities. You basically can change the entire urban form. And it requires you to work on all these different technologies universally to be able to do that. What's interesting about this problem is it's going to lead to a huge amount of data, essentially a net, about information about cities. But they don't correlate as well with the current techniques of machine learning and deep learning because cities are all very different in their terrain. So this is going to require a whole new set of AI techniques. The last panel, they talked about transfer learning. That's one that's being looked at right now for organisms as complicated as cities. So these will not just be problems solved with the techniques we have today and the technology we have today. We'll see them both in parallel moving forward to the next decade. And in fact, the Institute of Data, Society, and Systems, which is a group within MIT that ties a lot of the different departments together, has their annual conference coming up on May 11th and 12th. And this year, it's actually about this problem. But how do you apply these techniques to urban systems? It'll be 2 days there. Another very complicated system is the idea of human health. And so that's been talked about here today, but just very briefly. Some of the speakers talked about medical imaging. Medical imaging is not just the idea of bringing images forward using deep learning on that and trying to figure out how to create better images. But now startups, including startups that are coming out of MIT, are able to use that to actually be able to change the way the machines take images. So in ultrasound, for example, you can rearrange that to be able to move the machine around and get better images than you've ever been able to do before, and that's by applying AI to those medical imaging ideas. There's a whole new department, cross-department between bioengineering and computer science in data-driven therapeutics. The idea of actually using things like CRISPR-Cas9, being able to change the genomics, take that back, and start to be able to look for drug therapies where those drugs can be used on individuals. You can basically tailor drugs to the individuals. And then a lot was talked about earlier today in brain and cognitive science, effectively a whole new computer system. And one of the professors that was here talked about the idea of, Ed Boyden, talked about the idea of being able to take pieces out and magnify them and get orders of magnitude more data. And from that, be able to look at cancer changes with dynamic learning that you could never do before. And that's something they're just starting to do in the last year. As well as the idea of being able to look into your head, basically through things like cell phones, to be able to look for Alzheimer markers. So where we're headed with that is truly revolutionary. And again, on May 1st, there's a conference at MIT called Brains on Brains that will be able to go through that. So we just wanted to give you a glimpse of basically where we've been and where we're headed. And what we're headed for is the idea of optimizing a better world. This is Zetta Venture Partners. That's who we are. Jocelyn Canoe and Kristen are here, as well as I. And we're funding the entrepreneurs of today, as we talked about in AI, but we're also looking to fund the entrepreneurs of tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to ask you, how do you plan to use AI to create a better world? And if you have some ideas, we really hope you'll come to see us to talk about it. Thank you very much.